detail. CPAC, created for us all.
Hello, I'm Martin Stringer, sitting in for Peter Van Dusen, and this is Primetime Politics on CPAC. Coming to you later tonight because of votes in the House of Commons, and tonight our focus is on an issue which dominated the news and much of the debate on Parliament Hill, the crisis in the Northern Ontario community of Attawapiskat. A little later in the show we'll bring you testimony from Aboriginal Affairs Minister John Duncan, who today appeared before a House of Commons parliamentary committee to discuss the issue of his department's spending and handling of Native affairs. But while that was happening, the Canadian Red Cross today continued to deliver emergency aid, heaters, blankets, and sleeping bags to members of the Attawapiskat First Nation. Several hundred residents have been living in tents or uninsulated shacks and trailers as the temperature today plunged below -20 degrees. Last month, the community declared a state of emergency, and the opposition parties in Parliament are calling the housing crisis in Attawapiskat a national disgrace. But the government says it has transferred more than $19 million to the First Nation in the last 5 years. And today, it announced it is calling in a third party to take over management of the band's finances. The issue brought angry exchanges in question period, exchanges about that First Nation, but also about conditions facing Native people across the country. Here's some of what was said at question period and afterwards out at scrums.
Take responsibility. He has to take charge. It is his duty to help the people of Attawapiskat. And that's our Canadian community living in third world countries. That's what we see right now. In the Arctic cold, -22 today. The Prime Minister should go and see by himself. You should sleep in a shack with a sleeping bag. You'll see that the sleeping bag provided by the Red Cross is not the solution. We need better. Winter is coming. Where is the action? Where is the leadership?
Right Honourable Prime Minister. Again, Mr. Speaker, this government has invested more than $90 million in this community since coming to office. Obviously, the results are not satisfactory, Mr. Speaker. That's why the government has people on the ground taking additional emergency action, and why also we will be now announcing additional steps to deal with management problems in this community.
Mr. Chairman, the state of emergency has been declared 1 month ago in Attawapiskat. There's a Red Cross team right on the spot at this time. But where is the federal government? Where is their plan? The government must work together with the community to find a long-term solution. Is the government going to declare a state of emergency and help out people in distress at Attawapiskat?
Mr. Speaker, we're continuing to work with the province and the community to implement the emergency management plan to ensure that residents have access to warm, dry, and safe shelter. On-the-ground assessment has determined that urgent health and safety issues demand immediate action. Therefore, we've informed Chief Spence that we are placing the First Nation in third-party management. I've also requested a comprehensive audit to identify how money has been spent and what oversight measures have been taken over the past 5 years.
The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Mr. Speaker, Attawapiskat is ground zero of a national catastrophe, and after a month of inaction, when the Red Cross had to step in, when emergency measures had to step in, their solution is to blame the community. If they wanted to know what was happening in the community, they could have called their co-manager who's on the ground right now, who I spoke with yesterday. When the Red River floods, people show up. When Slave Lake burned, politicians showed up. Why are the people of Attawapiskat treated so differently? Why is it that when it's a First Nation community in distress, this government's response is contempt?
priority is ensuring that people in immediate need get adequate shelter as quickly as possible. We're also looking at ways to ensure this situation does not happen again. We agree that we cannot have Band-Aid solutions. There are larger structural issues here that need to be addressed. We will be providing short and longer term ways to address these concerns. Thank you.
The honourable member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the government that should be placed under third-party management is right across the way, right over there. That's what's been under third-party management. It's a classic case. There are dozens of Attawapiscats. There are dozens of Attawapiscats right across this country. It's not the only community that's facing these conditions and these difficulties. The Auditor General of Canada herself said, Mr. Speaker, in her last report that the Aboriginal people of this country are living in intolerable conditions. It's the government that has to take responsibility for what's happened and not simply continue to blame the victim. This government is all hat and no cattle when it comes to treating.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've said repeatedly, this government has made large-scale investments in this community, unlike the party opposite when it was in government. And this government is determined and is prepared to take the steps necessary to ensure results with those funds. And that's why, by the way, Mr. Speaker, the people of Canada placed the Liberal Party under third-party management.
As I said in the House, where you need a trustee, where you need third-party management is over the Government of Canada, because they are completely refusing to take any responsibility for what they've done and what they have not done. They're refusing to take any responsibility for the true cost of the cancellation of the Kelowna Accord. That's a $5 billion decision that they made. They never owned up to the consequences that it would have. It was announced in 2005. It was booked in the Department of Finance. The money was ready to go on housing, infrastructure, water, accountability. It was all in the Accord. It had been negotiated for over a year. Well, this government has failed to live up to its own responsibilities.
Do you think that third-party management is going to make a difference?
I mean, what are you going to put? Are you going to put the entire north of Canada under trusteeship? Because Attawapiscat is not the only community that has this level of a problem. The Auditor General of Canada didn't point to mismanagement in terms of individual communities. What she said was that the Government of Canada itself was not taking responsibility for its decisions. So this is a classic attempt by the Harper government to avoid its own responsibilities and to blame others. And it's not acceptable that they should do that.
What about the fact that they're already under co-management for something like the last 13 months or something like that? If they're under co-management already, surely the government has been responsible.
Exactly. The government has to take responsibility for what it has not done. But let us not make the big mistake of thinking that Attawapiscat is the only community in the far north which is facing these kinds of conditions and these kinds of difficulties. What troubles me about this whole debate is that everyone's going to focus on this one community. The government's going to say we're putting it under strong management, that's going to solve the problem, and everybody's going to walk away from their television sets and think the problem is solved. The problem isn't solved. The housing issue is catastrophic right across these communities across northern Canada. The situation with respect to water affects hundreds of communities across the country. It is not acceptable for this government to play such political games with these communities. This government made a deliberate decision to ignore the agreement that was signed by the Government of Canada and all the provinces and territories with respect to a new set of priorities for investment in Aboriginal communities, which is called the Kelowna Accord. That accord was a year and a half in the making in terms of negotiations and discussions. It involved housing. It involved water. It involved commitments on infrastructure. And if we'd gone ahead with Kelowna, we wouldn't be in the position we're in today. That's a simple reality, that what the government did was unconscionable in the circumstances. So let's be clear that there needs to be a plan, not just for Attawapiscat, but there needs to be a plan for right across the board that deals with this huge infrastructure problem that we have, as well as the major education gap, as well as the health gap. You look at the education gap, you look at the health gap, you look at the fact that, for example, the government yesterday said, well, we're spending all this money. In fact, they're spending half as much per capita half as much per student for high school students. The average for Ontario for high school students is $15,000 a student. They're spending $8,000 per student on reserve. Same thing's true for support for child services, for child welfare programs, everything. Everything that is done is less than what is required. It's not more than what is required. And so Mr. Harper is dreaming in Technicolor if he thinks that attacking those of us who believe that more investments are required is going to solve the problem. It isn't going to solve the problem. He has to understand that he's gave an apology to the House of Commons and to the people, the Aboriginal people, and to all the people of Canada in the name of reconciliation. And the key is that apology has to be followed up with action. It has to be followed up with real commitments, and we don't see those commitments.
I think it is important to say that this government, the federal government, doesn't listen to the community. As well as in this case, I know that they have to work jointly, the provincial one and the federal one. What I saw is terrible. What I saw is unacceptable in Canada. And this government, his only answer, he wants to get value for his money. This is not the right answer.
But the Prime Minister said yesterday his government has poured millions of dollars into Attawapiskat, breaking it down to like $55,000 per person. If that's the case, where did that money go?
I won't play with figures. The figures we got from his representative up north, there is a deficit of $4.5 million, and you have to break it down per year. So really, it's $5,000 or $6,500 per person. You cannot go anywhere with $6,500 in a municipality where you see poverty, as we saw yesterday.
The official is contradicting the Prime Minister, the official that you spoke to, or what?
I would say this person gave us. He had the figures in front of him, and we were talking about figures. But at the same time, I want to say the point here is it is an emergency situation. These people don't have place to live. These people are living in sheds. These people are living in tents without their kids or having their kids around them without eat. And it is -15. Today it's even -20. That's what I saw yesterday. And I would love this Prime Minister to go there. And then maybe he won't talk about money. He will talk about the people.
Qu'est-ce que vous savez de M. Harper de faire? Vous avez vu la situation? Qu'est-ce qu'il dit?
You've seen the situation yourself. What's going to happen? Well, yes, I've seen it as it was, and the Prime Minister should go there, should go by himself on the spot and see what's going on. This is what happens when you got an emergency in Canada. He's talking about money now. In the meantime, people are freezing out there. They can't keep their children. Their children are taken away because they have no decent place to live in. That's what I saw yesterday. And that's what I complain about the federal government who says they're listening to people.
Perhaps gives the impression that $90 million had gone, for housing to settle. And do you think in that way, because we hear that the money was for education as well, so is it misleading?
What he said they sent a lot of money out there. We're talking 80, 90 million. I won't play with figures. But he's not talking about number of years. He's not talking that 80% of that money was for education. At the same time, you have a school there that is on things at diesel, that is against the health of the people, of the students there. That's what I saw. I heard testimony from young students or young women that are really sick, that have cancer. One had a transplant of lungs, and it's all based, they say it's all based environment that is a problem out there. So that's what I saw. And right now, this government has to take measures to correct this. They need housing, they need affordable housing, they need apartments, they need food, they need eaters, they need all kinds of things to be able to have a better life. It's unacceptable in Canada.
Are you saying that they should send more money to Attawapiskat?
I would say they have first to resolve the problem that we have now. Winter is coming. That's what I'm looking at. If they want to debate, and I don't have any problem for accountability, no problem at all. What I want now is a short-term plan for people to live in a decent place. On a long term, we need to have discussion with First Nation, and this government has to take some leadership and see what is the problem right there. They have to have money. This is clear to me. $6,500 per person is not enough for me. They need to. It's not even the poverty level. They need money to clear, but they need a plan at the same time. They need discussion to create something out there.
Does it make sense to have northern communities like this, where it's so expensive to fly everything? I understand it's a reserve; they live there, but how much sense does it make?
I would say I really like about it because I went in a market and I look at the price of food out there. You have a small box of clementine on special, $10. You have milk, $10 a pint. You have juice, $10, and you ask them to survive in all this. A thing like this of wood is $180, and they said they can use it. It will go on for 15 days, and that's it. So that's what I saw, the reality out there. And we don't have a clue about this reality here, especially not Mr. Harper. He doesn't know this reality, and it's about time that he takes some leadership on this one.
Should they be there? Like, should they move? Should they be moved?
I don't believe that they should move. They should have proper education. They should have proper housing to be able to survive and to be able to live in their culture, in their community.
Hello again, I'm Martin Stringer, and you've been watching reactions from the opposition parties to the situation in the Northern Ontario First Nation of Attawapiskat. Well, the situation facing Canada's Native people was also front and centre when the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, John Duncan, appeared before a House of Commons committee today. The Minister was invited to discuss his department's spending, but he was also grilled on the crisis in Attawapiskat and problems of water, housing and education facing First Nations and Aboriginal people across the country. Here is his appearance before that committee today.
I'll do my best to answer your questions in a few minutes. First, though, I'd like to provide details about a few key items listed in Supplementary Estimates B. The allotment of $179.4 million to the independent assessment process for the residential school settlement is the largest single item on the list. This amount includes $136 million in new funding and $43.4 million reprofiled from last year. This investment supports the Government of Canada's commitment to respecting the terms of the court-ordered Indian residential school settlement agreed to by all parties. The additional funding will respond to increased application levels to the independent assessment process. The Government of Canada remains committed to concluding agreements with former students and their families. Continuing the implementation of the settlement agreement builds on our government's commitment to moving towards healing, reconciliation and resolution between Aboriginal peoples and other Canadians. The second largest item in the estimates is $109.1 million for the assessment, management, and remediation of federal contaminated sites. The Government of Canada is committed to the health and safety of all Canadians. This money will support our government's ongoing efforts in safe and timely environmental cleanup. Our government continues to work closely with First Nations, Inuit, and Northern communities to remediate contaminated sites. Budget 2011 allocated $68 million over 2 years to the Federal Contaminated Sites Action Plan. Most of this investment focuses on priority sites in the north, such as the Giant Mine in Yellowknife and the Faro Mine. In the past 2 years, the Government of Canada has committed more than $330 million to projects at hundreds of sites in the north and on reserves across the country. Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to highlight a few other items listed in the supplementary estimates and explain how they relate to this government's broader goals. Improving the quality and availability of First Nations child and family services is a case in point. Significant improvements have been made in recent years as a result of a series of tripartite agreements between Canada, First Nations, and provincial governments.
The services delivered under these agreements focus on prevention and early intervention, leading to better outcomes for First Nations children, youth, and families. 2 items in the estimates support this goal. $6 million to fund an agreement in Manitoba and $1.2 million for a dedicated database to track results. Agreements are already in place in Alberta, Nova Scotia, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and Prince Edward Island. This means that nearly 70% of all First Nations children who live on reserve have access to services delivered under the new model. We hope to complete agreements with other jurisdictions in the next few years. Mr. Chairman, the items listed in the supplementary estimates are only one part of this government's plan to address the issues facing Northerners and Aboriginal peoples. As the members of this committee recognize, legislation also plays an important role. Bill C-22, for instance, which I'm happy to note just received royal assent yesterday, completes an agreement to establish the EU Marine Region and authorize First Nation groups to co-manage and protect islands in James Bay and southeastern Hudson Bay. Bill S-2 proposes to close the legal gap that exists in matrimonial rights and interests on reserve. And Bill C-27, the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, which is part of the government's commitment in the 2011 speech from the throne to support democratic, transparent, and accountable First Nation governments by requiring that chiefs and councillors publish their salaries and expenses and audited consolidated financial statements. I'm also committed to reintroducing a bill that will propose a mechanism to set standards to safeguard the quality of drinking water in First Nation communities. A goal of these and other legislative initiatives is to create the accountability mechanisms needed to foster economic and social development. This committee will have an important role in moving the agenda forward. I believe the study currently underway on sustainable economic development will be valuable and pertinent. In June, the Auditor General's status report analyzed why so many Government of Canada programs fail to deliver the intended benefits to First Nation communities. A key factor cited in the report is that many programs have no legislative base. Should a program fail, no one can be held accountable. To ensure that programs and investments achieve their goals, this government will continue to develop and implement appropriate legislative remedies in collaboration with our stakeholders. Another element of the Government of Canada's strategy to promote economic and social development among Northern and Aboriginal communities is working with willing partners. I'm proud to note this past June, the National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations and I announced the Canada First Nation Joint Action Plan to improve the lives of First Nation people across Canada. The action plan expresses our joint commitment to work together to improve the long-term prosperity of First Nation people and all Canadians. Strategic partnerships with provincial and Aboriginal groups that continue to improve education outcomes in a growing number of First Nation schools are another instance of the work we do with willing partners. Collaborative initiatives to improve the educational outcomes of First Nation students are now underway in 7 provinces, and engagement sessions held last year helping to inform improvements to Aboriginal economic development programs, including efficiencies in program delivery. Strategic partnerships have also inspired significant progress on specific claims and First Nation access to safe drinking water. The Beaufort Regional Environmental Assessment is another example of a strategic partnership among Inuvialuit, oil and gas industry, territorial and federal government, regulators, and academia to prepare for oil and gas activity in the Beaufort Sea. Together, they have supported research and actions that will provide information and data in support of efficient and effective regulatory decisions. The larger goal of this government's plan is to ensure that all citizens, Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal alike, can share in and contribute to Canada's prosperity. The investments included in the supplementary estimates are designed to complement existing programs, partnerships, and legislative initiatives. I'm confident that the items under review will lead to further progress for Aboriginal peoples, Northerners, and all Canadians. Thank you very much. I'll do my best to answer any questions that the members of the committee may have about Supplementary Estimates B.
Thank you, Minister. We appreciate that testimony. Today we are, I didn't say earlier, we are considering votes 1B, 5B, 10B under Indian Affairs and Northern Development, as well as votes 27B and 29B under Health Canada. So I'm sure that you'll be prepared to answer questions as it relates to these Supplementary B estimates, and we'll begin that questioning with Ms. Duncan for the first 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for attending. Our party has fought long and hard for you to get here. It's regrettable that our time will be so short, but we'll hopefully have some key questions to you in the short time that we have been allotted. You mentioned, Mr. Minister, the last report by Auditor General Sheila Fraser, in which she slammed your government and the previous Liberal government for a decade of failed action on her recommendations in 15 chapters on Inuit and First Nations and additional 15 chapters on Aboriginal peoples to deliver safe drinking water, to ensure removal of the living conditions worse than First Nation reserves and elsewhere in Canada, and a high school graduation rate, half of that for other Canadian students. The problem is clearly greater than Attawapiskat. 30 reports over a decade by the Auditor General have made that clear. She blamed the government, as you mentioned, Mr. Minister, for structural impediments. You've mentioned you're bringing forward some legislation. I'll get in my second question to some concerns the First Nations have raised about the process of developing this legislation. But clearly the Auditor General said it was time to have clear measures to hold the government accountable. She did not point fingers at the First Nations. My question to you is, why then is your first response to the crisis at Attawapiskat to bring in third-party governance when in fact these problems have been known for quite some time? Why is your government choosing, this government frankly isn't at the pot calling the kettle black on access to information and accountability? And is this now a warning to all other First Nations who may befall them if they raise publicly their concerns?
We put people into the community, officials into the community on Monday. They were there because there was concern about the health and safety of residents of the community. Their on-the-ground take on things was that immediate action is required. On the basis that immediate action is required, the fastest way to respond is to put in third-party management. They are able to manage departmental funds in the way that the First Nation would normally manage them. They can respond very quickly, and we also left an engineer in the community, so work is now ongoing on renovating some of the homes. So we have mobilized very quickly, and I think it's an appropriate response given the real concerns for the health and safety of Attawapiskat residents.
Thanks, Mr. Minister. You mentioned the legislation that you're bringing forward, and the fact that you are collaborating with stakeholders. I'm not sure what that means. I don't know if that means simply the individual First Nations. Of course, Mr. Minister, you're aware that you have a constitutional duty upheld by the Supreme Court of Canada to consult, consider, and accommodate Aboriginal and treaty rights and interests in advance of any law, policy, or program which potentially may impact First Nations. This summer, as you are aware, I've written to you, and I'm still waiting for the reply, with my concerns of whether or not this government is going to revise their policies and practices. The federal court held that the federal Minister of Environment, then Minister of Environment Jim Prentice, had erred in law by deeming that he did not actually consider the rights and interests of Aboriginal peoples when he made decisions under the Endangered Species Act. The First Nations have expressed to me, I've consulted with First Nations across the country, and in particular I just had a meeting with Treaty 6, 7, and 8 Grand Chiefs. They are very concerned that they do not consider that they are being adequately consulted on the laws that you're bringing forward, including the laws that you have mentioned. And we've just heard, as I understand, that SIA has cancelled their consultation process with Aboriginals, that plan. The First Nations have called for a more collaborative, hands-on approach in consulting with them well in advance of any new policies and practices. That, of course, has been the policy of this government in any policies that might impact provinces and territories. So I'm wondering what measures you're planning to take to improve in response to the request made by the First Nations to genuinely consult as per your duty under the Constitution.
Well, as I said, we've worked with willing partners in the First Nations community because we think it's the right thing to do. The legal duty to consult and accommodate is very clear to us in terms of what it means. I believe we go well beyond it because we're talking about Section 35 rights. When we collaborate on child and family services, when we collaborate on education, when we collaborate on water, when we collaborate on electoral reforms, those are all things that are somewhat discretionary for us to do, but we want to do it because we'll end up with better legislation and support from the First Nations leadership. This just makes sense for us to do, and we've done a lot of it. That's the philosophy we've been operating under. In terms of your questions about SIA and the Endangered Species Act, I'm out of my element on those. That's something you'd have to talk to the Environment Minister about.
Thanks. One last quick question. Mr. Minister, you mentioned these agreements that you're about to enter into. We're hearing serious concerns about the failure of this government to deliver on their binding obligations constitutionally entrenched to deliver on the land claims agreements that this government and previous governments have already signed. So can you please advise when you're planning to move on your implementation requirements to the Council of Yukon Indians, to the Nunavut, to the Nisga'a?
If you can, in 15 seconds.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm actually meeting with the land claims group that you are referencing, and we've made enough serious progress over the last couple or 3 years that really most of the issues have gone away. Our implementation has been done very well, and I may hear some specific items today, but my understanding is that for the most part, we've really addressed the whole implementation issue very well.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Rickford for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for coming here today. We appreciate your time. Minister, first of all, just with respect to your speech, I took great comfort in your remarks around responding to the Auditor General with respect to a legislative base for many of the large-scale programs and projects. As somebody who's lived in isolated and remote First Nations communities for quite some time, I've always appreciated the need for that, and I look forward to working with you in those regards. I do want to talk, first of all, a little bit about Attawapiskat, and the questions are twofold, Minister. There has been much said in recent days about the state of affairs. Obviously, as a government, and like all other Canadians, we want to be able to proceed with an effective plan to help them through the emergency circumstances and set a platform for longer term objectives and ensure ultimately that families have safe and warm places to live. I was wondering then if you could comment on your actions to fill that void in the short to immediate term, and could you comment as well on from the perspective of the department, that some certainty around the $80 million that it has received from our department, and what you will be doing to ensure that those resources and any further resources in Attawapiskat from our department are for the ultimate benefit of the community members.
Well, thank you for the question, and I know you're quite familiar with Northern Ontario and with many of these remote reserve communities, First Nation communities. Now, I mentioned we've had officials in the community since November 28th, which was Monday. They have assessed the situation. They know what's needed to ensure that the residents have access to warm, dry, and safe shelter. And these needs are urgent and demand immediate action. So, as a consequence, we've put the First Nation into third-party management. Part of the manager's role will be to administer the department's funding. This is normally managed by the First Nation. And in addition to that, we will be doing a comprehensive audit over spending from the department over the last 5 years in order to see why our results have been so poor.
Thank you, Minister. Now I'm going to shift gears here, and my colleagues, we have a number of matters addressed in your speech we'd like some further information on. I'm going to start, Minister, with the state of the implementation of the Gender Equity in Indian Registration Act, referring, of course, to Bill C-3. Can you give us an update in regards to that?
We approved $20 million over 5 years to ensure that Bill C-3 applicants can be registered efficiently, and that started on January 31st of this year.
How many applicants do you anticipate, Minister?
We anticipate 50,000 applications will be received, with about a 10% ineligibility rate, so that would lead to about 45,000 new entrants. As of the middle of this month, we had received 22,900 applications. 8,800 have been processed, 6,700 have been finalized, 5,300 have been registered, 530 have been denied, 950 were closed due to files that were closed due to non-response from applicants, and we've requested additional information on just over 2,000.
Thank you, Minister. I understand that the department had an opportunity to gain some valuable experience in the processing of these applications and may have made some modifications. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I gather there's been a lot of efficiencies created since the process started. There was a staff of 55 who are dedicated solely to that function of registering Bill C-3 applicants. The department also augmented its call center capability and capacity to ensure efficient client services. We are anticipating by the end of March the completion of 23,000 files, which will bring us within our service standard to register applicants within 6 months.
Appreciate that. So increased efficiencies and additional resources. I'm going to talk a little bit about specific claims tribunal in the last little over a minute here. Can you describe, Minister, what progress has been made on resolving specific claims since the coming into force of the Specific Claims Tribunal Act on October 16th of 2008?
Yeah, well, this is a real success story of this government because the specific claims process was so bogged down. I mean, I've got chiefs in my riding that have been chief for over 20 years that had specific claims for the length of time they'd basically been in office.
I understand there was a significant backlog.
There was I think the backlog was around
900 at least.
Yeah, give or take 1,000, and so we've cleared up a backlog of over 500. We also settled 40 through negotiations, which totaled $925 million. So we now have an inventory that's reduced by more than half. So we have 102 claims under assessment, 300 claims in negotiation, for a total of 402. So we have concluded altogether 1,029 claims. So I remembered 1,000. So that's where we are. I think it's a real success story. And one of the things that became we didn't know is as we dealt with the backlog, were we going to get another onslaught? Hasn't happened.
Okay.
So there's a few that have dribbled in, but basically we see this process as one that we can kind of deal with the backlog, and then the regular intake will be very simple, straightforward to deal with.
Thank you, Minister. No, your time is up. Ms. Bennett for 7 minutes.
Thanks very much. Minister, when were you first notified of the state of emergency in Attawapiskat?
I would say it was last week, about Thursday.
So the fact that it had been in the media since the end of October, there was no action?
It had been in the media, but we there is a process that's involved here.
And would that be the same process if it was a tornado or a flood?
No.
But people living in tents with winter coming, that's dealt differently? There's 3 or 4 weeks of paperwork for that?
No, there's no paperwork, but what we have is a process. When a First Nation wants to declare a state of emergency, they do so in a format that reaches us. That did not happen. There was no official state of emergency delivered, and in actual fact, when we did receive what we received, it had no specifics attached to it.
Did anybody in your department pick up the phone and find out how it's going up there?
We've had people in the community for months and months dealing with the school construction and other things.
These are all the visits?
Yeah. The visits were 15th March, 19th of May, 12th of April, 2nd of July, 7th of July, 12th of July, 2nd of September, 21st of October, 5th of October, 31st of October. I can tell you that the member from Timmins Bay, James Bay, has had many, many opportunities to talk about this, and that didn't happen either. So
I think some of us would beg to differ. Attawapiskat's become a household name since Shannon's Dream. I mean,
that was about the school.
Well, it's about a lot of things. I understand that in the media it says that Saskatchewan and Fort Albany have also declared a state of emergency. Do you know anything about that, Minister?
News to me.
Okay. In the estimates, sometimes it's what's there, but it's also what's not there. And since April, your department's had a paper that you commissioned showing the huge need in terms of water and wastewater for hundreds of communities across the country, yet I don't see any money in the estimates for that. Are we to expect that coming in the budget? Because, I think I've already sent you a letter saying that we won't be supporting any legislation unless there's money to go with it.
Well, we have money in the budget for water and wastewater.
The $1.2 billion that was in the report?
Supplementary estimates, but we've certainly been spending much money on water and wastewater. As a matter of fact, we're committed by the end of 2012-2013, we'll have spent, since forming government, $2.5 billion just on those two items.
But just continue to spend in the same way. When you commissioned a report to look at the needs assessment, will there be any alteration in the budget based on the results of that report you commissioned? Or are you just going to keep spending and leave all these homes without running water?
We were setting our priorities on where we spent our money on water and wastewater based on the survey that was done, I believe, in 2003 under the Liberal administration. Which very conveniently, for example, excluded communities without piped water.
Yep, no, I've heard you say that before.
Yes,
on housing,
yes, you have, and all I'm saying is we are now in possession of a report that
your government voted in favor of the Liberal motion 2 weeks ago. In order to fulfill the obligation under that motion passed by the Parliament of Canada, can we expect to see some money in the budget to actually realize that when 100% of First Nations communities 100% of their homes will have safe running drinking water and wastewater management?
Well, yes, and that's why we supported the budget. The motion. We have been spending with that exact objective, and we have a 2-year commitment that extends into next year.
At the same level?
Yes, and we are in a time of concern about expenses, but we will. We have a way of setting priorities, and water and wastewater is a priority item for the government.
Colleagues, I just have to interject here. I do apologize, Ms. Bennett. We'll stop the clock. We do have bells that are ringing. What I need is all parties' consent, or all members' consent, to continue sitting as a committee till I'm thinking 4:15, which will give us 4:25, which will still give us some opportunities to ask questions, but give us some time to get back to the House on time. Is there all members' consent to do that?
Equalized assessment.
There is full consent. Ms. Bennett, we'll return to you now for your question.
Thank you. The assessment that you did on water, is there an equal assessment done on housing need? In that, I understand that from your department, do you think there's about 25,000 homes that are required, yet the AFN says it's probably 85,000. Do you have a report telling you really the housing need? And again, there doesn't seem to be any money in the estimates on housing.
But it's not that level of engineering assessment.
Yeah, we don't. We have data, but we don't have it to the same level as the water assessment, which was, I think we looked at 98% of every residence or public building in terms of their water and wastewater. Very comprehensive survey. So no, we don't have it to that level, but we make capital plans, and the capital plans are done regionally and nationally to set priorities. I understand that your position is that you just continue to throw money until such time as everything's taken care of, and it just doesn't work that way.
No, I think that's what Kelowna was about, that there had to be an accountability piece, plus health, education, housing, and economic development. I think Kelowna Accord was very clear of the interactivity of those things. $5 billion, though, as well.
Well, you can do the math. I just finished saying we've spent $2.5 billion just on water and wastewater, and if you look at what we did on housing and other infrastructure, I'll take no backseat to whatever you have to say about your plans that were never implemented.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clark for 7 minutes. Thanks, Ms. Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the Minister for coming. I kind of get amused when I hear the Kelowna Accord, when it's a last-ditch effort, try to make a right. It's kind of a joke, because when I was in the House of Commons, I asked for a copy of the Kelowna Accord with one of your colleagues. She couldn't even produce that. So it's quite insulting to hear it from the Liberal, yeah. And when they could have tabled it, they failed to do so. I look at the current funding right now, is at $10.2 billion for First Nations and Aboriginals to try to meet some of these issues. And back in 2005, I believe it was at 5.4. And I remember sitting in Health Committee and listening to the department talk about additional funding just for health care and the whole program with the Kelowna Accord. It was only $5 million additional dollars. So slap me in the head. I don't know what else as a First Nation I should be insulted whenever they mention the Kelowna Accord. Anyhow, I've vented enough here, and I apologize, Minister. Just the Kelowna Accord was a false promise, a hollow promise, and it just irks me when I hear that. I'm kind of curious just about the residential schools. My grandmother, my grandfather attended the residential schools in Duck Lake, and I've seen some of the hardships going with residential school survivors. My grandparents, and I have to say, my grandmother and grandfather actually benefit from residential schools. And to the point where when there was a cash payout, they didn't spend a cent. And it remained in her bank account till the day she died. Now, just in regards to the residential schools settlement agreement, can you just please update the committee on that?
Yes, I can. Before I do that, you had a segue about spending. We had a surge of $1.4 billion from the Economic Action Plan that went to First Nations, and some of that was leveraged with provincial money as well, and that was over and above the normal capital spending from the department. So this made a real difference in a lot of places. This is one of the reasons why the local chief, one of the local chiefs in my area, said we had accomplished more in 3 years than the Liberals had in 13 in terms of Aboriginal affairs. Now, in terms of the residential school settlement agreement, in September we passed the deadline for applying for the Common Experience payment, and at that date 97% of the 80,000 originally estimated claimants had been paid. Pretty good track record. There was a lot of public information, a lot of advertising to make sure that people got the message that the program was ending. We will continue to process applications until September the 19th this year, or next year, 2012. So it's not like the door is closed. And this would be in cases of disability, undue hardship, or exceptional circumstances. So it's a subjective decision. In respect to the independent assessment process, 21,000 applications have been admitted and 12,400 claims have been resolved. We expect the current application forecast to reach 30,000 by the deadline, which is September the 19th, 2012.
Well, I'm just kind of curious to read on just the amount of the independent assessment process, the amount of applications that came through, just to get more clarification on that, on the numbers.
Well, the numbers are more than we predicted, more than we forecast, and the award per claim is also more than we forecast. So this is an expensive process, but it really isn't about the money. We got into the Indian residential school settlement because it was the right thing to do. It's all about reconciliation. It has had profound emotional consequences for many families. I've been personally aware of, including families that didn't know within their own siblings what had gone on. It had been hidden, and it all came out after the Prime Minister's apology. So I think the fact that this is arm's length, that it's court approved, court supervised, and court adjudicated, I think is fantastic. It's absolutely been the right thing to do, and it's a proud moment, I believe, for our government that we made this happen.
Just on that note, I'm just get some clarification or just more insight, just in regards to some stained glass that's possibly being installed.
Well, yes, because we're 308 members of Parliament that are very used to our surroundings, we forget what special real estate we're occupying. The center block is extraordinary structure. We now, if you stand in the foyer of the House of Commons, where all the scrums are, and you look straight ahead, there's 3 windows over the entrance door. That's a south-facing wall. There's always lots of light on that wall. So the middle window, we have the speaker's permission to utilize that middle window to commemorate the residential school survivors, Inuit, Métis, First Nation, and so we're going to set up an advisory panel, and they're going to commission Aboriginal artists to create that stained glass. We with the full expectation that the project will be finished in 2012, and that's a legacy that will always be there.